Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025, and today we have some pretty big news out of the state of Ohio. Sherrod Brown, the former senator from this state who had represented this state for decades in the United States Senate, is now running again in the 2026 election year after losing in the 2024 Senate elections. Now, we all remember that Sherrod Brown is a name that really is very well known in Ohio politics. He ran for re-election in 2024 against now Senator Bernie Moreno and lost by about 4 percentage points in a state that Kamala Harris lost by about 11 percentage points, outpacing Kamala Harris and Democrats at the top of the ticket by roughly 7 points. And now Sherrod Brown deciding to run for Senate in 2026 really does throw Ohio back into being a state that is in play and in consideration for Democrats in the 2026 election year. Now, if we remember much about Sherrod Brown, we will know that in 2024, his loss here actually was predated by a victory in the 2018 midterm elections, the last time we saw a Democratic wave on the national level. And in that 2018 election, Sherrod Brown took a state that 2 years prior voted for Trump by 8 points and voted for Rob Portman, at the time the Republican senator, by 21 points. His retirement is what led to J.D. Vance ultimately becoming vice president. But Rob Portman won by 21 points, and 2 years later, Sherrod Brown won not just by a small margin, but by 7 points across the state in what was expected to be a pretty competitive race in the 2018 election. Now, Sherrod Brown's victory in 2018 was one that Republicans were really upset about. Not just because he was winning in a state that they wanted to win in, but that the expectations here were that Donald Trump would help carry many of these Republicans across the finish line in many of the states that they currently had, dominating margins in the presidential election. States like Ohio were included, but I also think to states like Montana and states like West Virginia. And the 2018 election was so interesting and so dynamic because it forced Republicans to be on the defense and offense in a number of states they would have never had to compete in like you might have in years before. States like Indiana, states like Tennessee, states like Missouri and North Dakota all got within 11 points or narrower, including Mississippi and Florida and Texas. And practically, around half, if not more than half, of all the states Republicans won in the 2018 midterms were all in states that Democrats were in positions where they got within a reasonable margin of victory. And in many of the states that Donald Trump won by 40 points or 20 points or 10 points, Democrats ended up winning. Now, thinking about the 2026 race, it's not an identical election, and the circumstances around the national map are very, very different. For instance, when you take a look at a lot of these states, Democrats don't have strong candidates in many of them. But Sherrod Brown adding into Ohio certainly makes it more reasonable to believe that this race is one that Democrats can win. There was a lot of expectation that instead of run for Senate, that Sherrod Brown instead run for governor. He had openly floated with the idea of it and actually seemed more inclined up until about a month ago to run for governor than instead run for Senate. And that's because his chances at winning in the, governor election were tremendously higher than people thought than in the general election. That if Ramaswamy was the Republican nominee for governor, that it would put Republicans in a weak position because he's not popular. Voters don't love Donald Trump to the degree that they did before. And even if they do, the electorate that 2026 will look like will be radically different than that of 2024. And if Sherrod Brown came within 4 points of victory in a nationalized race against a candidate as weak as Ramaswamy, chances were that in 2026 he might have been able to overcome it. But now, instead of running for governor, he's deciding to run for Senate. And this actually does complicate things quite a bit for the Republican Party. When they looked at the 2026 Senate race with, Jon Husted, you were looking at a race that Democrats said they were not going to be competing in to the degree that they thought. Without Sherrod Brown, there was really nobody who was going to be in this race that could have done anything besides lose it by 15 to 20 points. It wasn't going to be one that these candidates wanted to engage with and enter into. That all changed with Sherrod Brown. He had been serving in the U.S. Senate since the 2006 midterm elections. Arguably speaking, yes, 2024 was his time to go, but in 2006, he actually won against none other than incumbent Republican Governor Mike DeWine, who's now governor of Ohio and appointed the replacement who will now face up against Sherrod Brown. So it will be quite an interesting race. Regardless, though, Sherrod Brown won this race after in 2000, it voted for Mike DeWine. So 2006 comes around, Sherrod Brown wins the race. 2012 comes around, Sherrod Brown wins the race. 2018 comes around, Sherrod Brown wins the race. And in 2024, it was this race where Donald Trump won by 11 points statewide on the presidential level, that he lost by 4. Now, here's the thing. Democrats look to this number and say, well, if the national environment is 5 points to the left of what it was in 2024, which I can guarantee you at baseline it will be at least 5 points to the left, one could reasonably consider that in the 2024 elections, just shifting them based off a 5-point margin, here's what you would find. Democrats would have won Ohio, and it would have given Democrats 49 seats in the U.S. Senate instead of 47. They would have won Pennsylvania as well, but the point isn't that. The point is that it is Ohio that would have been a much closer race, and it's one that Sherrod Brown ultimately would have won. But 2026 and this race is not identical to 2024. Are his odds of victory at 20 to 30%? Probably somewhere around there, because this race is not against a candidate like Bernie Moreno. And it's not against a candidate like Sherrod Brown, J.D. Vance. Jon Husted has been in local governance for quite some time. He served as lieutenant governor. He was secretary of state. He served in the Ohio Senate. He was the speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives. I mean, he has been involved in electoral politics since before I was born in 2001. And so him now becoming a U.S. senator in Ohio is a largely uncontroversial figure. Someone that a lot of the Republicans respect and clearly are not challenging in the general election, has already received the endorsement of Donald Trump and the Ohio GOP, a very clear field, already raising money in this position. And he starts out as the favorite because Ohio, at its core, right now is a red state. And this isn't to say that Sherrod Brown can't win it. But I honestly believed his odds of winning the governorship against Ramaswamy, if he went full force into this race, would have been around 45 to 50%. Equal, if not slightly down odds, right? Or slightly down odds, if not equal odds, is a better way to phrase it. Looking at the Senate race, though, he is the underdog. Now, again, underdogs win all the time. Underdogs win constantly and always in American politics, but typically speaking, they do not. And that is why they are the underdogs. Now, I don't doubt that Sherrod Brown could change up the race or, move things, back and forth between Democrats and Republicans and make it a race that is hyper competitive. I don't doubt that. But I think that 2026 would have to be a lot like 2018 for Sherrod Brown to even come across that finish line, and that is asking a lot. Because what happened in 2018 was that although Sherrod Brown was coming out of a state that Donald Trump won, he probably should have won this race by more given the national environment. Jim Renacki was the incumbent U.S. representative who represented the state of Ohio and had been running in this campaign, but not to the degree, really, that you could have run a campaign. I mean, we covered this race. Brown was almost the favorite from the very, very beginning, and the data suggested that he was actually going to win by more than what he won by. So it narrowed down. Inside Elections had it as safe Democrat. Cook Political Report had it as a likely Democrat. Real Clear Politics had it as lean Democrat. I mean, these races were quite good, don't get me wrong, for Sherrod Brown. And they got him to a point where he was on track for victory. But the expectation actually from members of his own party who were closely watching the race was that he was going to win by more. But even though he won, I mean, this is something that is absolutely commendable and super great for the Democratic Party to have any chance of winning in 2026. It doesn't make Sherrod Brown the favorite. It makes this race more competitive, and it doesn't even hint to the fact that if Sherrod Brown is to win this race, it doesn't give him a 6-year term. It means that he'd have to run in the 2028 Senate race, which is exactly what landed him a defeat in the 2024 race, which was coinciding with a presidential election. And if Ohio does not see massive reversions to the left in the next presidential election, Sherrod Brown, even if he wins this cycle, might face the same fate that 2024 brought him. But looking at the 2026 race, this is what I'm hyper-focused on. It really is going to be a fascinating race because the general election really has taken a huge change. Data points have suggested that against other Democrats, Jon Husted was going to have a more solid victory. Amongst the same group of voters, and this is polling in April, so maybe those numbers have changed as Trump has become less popular, and maybe Republicans across the state have too. But the point is that in the beginning of the cycle, the data was asked. February, Husted versus Tim Ryan. Husted defeated Tim Ryan by about 7 points, but only defeated Sherrod Brown by about 6. Again, neither of them came into this as the favorite, and Sherrod Brown doesn't today. But the numbers got better. In April, Husted defeated Tim Ryan by 6, but against Sherrod Brown, just by 3. And now that he's back in this race and actively doing everything he can to win this Senate race, it will be a very interesting one to watch and one that might narrow up to being way more competitive than we otherwise would have thought. But even today, Husted remains the favorite. This race, I think, will be the one too, that even if Democrats lose it, will be a reason that Democrats win in other states. Walk with me on this. Republicans were not expecting to defend a lot of the states that they are now looking that might be a possibility that they have to defend. For instance, a great example is Alaska, where right now there seems to be some consideration that Mary Peltola is considering running for Senate in 2026. She has also been floated as a name for governor, but this is someone who, if she runs for Senate, would make the race hyper competitive. Ohio comes into this as a race the Republicans were not expecting to spend money on or focus on at all. They thought that with Sherrod Brown in the governor's race, yes, the RGA would have to come in and Ramaswamy would have to use his personal fortune to go against Sherrod Brown to a degree that had not been seen in a long time. But now that he's running for Senate, now Republicans need to spend $50 to $100 million in this race because no one will let them spend any less. And if they do spend any less, chances are that Sherrod Brown might actually sneak out with a victory in this race. Republicans start out as the favorites in these states that I've mentioned, like Alaska, like Ohio. But if they are diverting resources from the National Republican Senatorial Committee, or they get back involved with billionaire donors who funnel in tens of millions of dollars into races, there's no guarantee that, that money is going to be enough to win them in the states that they're going to be spread thin on because they have to spread the resources elsewhere. If Republicans just had to target the states that Democrats currently hold, they could funnel $100 million into Michigan, $50 million into New Hampshire, $150 million into Georgia, and also defend their states that Democrats are targeting, like Maine and North Carolina. We were really working with about 5 key states the Democrats were looking to as hypothetically competitive. North Carolina, Georgia, New Hampshire, Michigan, and I can't believe I'm blanking on the last one. Either way, you are working with limited states, especially in comparison to the 2018 election where Ohio snuck through the cracks and Democrats ended up winning. But now with a more expansive map, who would benefit the most from Mary Peltola entering into this race? Democrats across the country, not only because they now have an outsized chance of victory at Alaska, but diverting resources to a state that Republicans haven't even seriously competed in a very long time. Save Nick Begich race, who is someone who knew how to run that race, in contrast with many other Republicans across the country, and arguably even too, we'll see that with Dan Sullivan, how well he would fare. But the point is that Ohio now being back on the radar for the Democratic Party is huge, huge news. Does a huge thing for the Democratic Party in terms of where they invest and how they invest, throws Ohio back into the running for maybe just one more cycle, and one that will likely be much more favorable to the Democrats than the 2024 election, and what that could likely end up with is Democrats, believe it or not, within a point or two of victory in Ohio, and about a 30% chance at victory. And while 30% is not 70%, Republicans can rely on a victory more than they can count against it. But either way, the race in Ohio is one that will be a spectacle to watch. More interesting, I think, and this is my opinion, than many of the other races that we have covered thus far, and that is because this race came completely out of left field. Husted was supposed to lock down the race. No one was supposed to run against him. Sherrod Brown was supposed to run for governor, and that was supposed to be our competitive Ohio race. But maybe Tim Ryan runs for governor, Sherrod Brown runs for Senate in Ohio, and maybe both of them lose, maybe both of them win. We will see. But it's going to be a fascinating race in a state that Donald Trump just won by double digits. And while I don't think Democrats are the favorites in either of the two races, not the governor's race, not the Senate race, it doesn't mean they can't win them. Because this national environment that 2026 is shaping up to be will be one that will be conducive to fluke victories, one-off victories. And Ohio might just have that. So this is going to be truly, this is breaking news. I had an entirely different video planned for today, and now I had to halt that and say we're going to talk about Ohio because this is just going to be the one to watch. This is going to be the most competitive Senate race on the national stage, maybe if you take out of the equation Maine, maybe, or North Carolina. And even then, I think Ohio could have the opportunity, based on where these trend lines are going, anti-Trump, pro-Democrat across the country, that North Carolina, to some degree, might end up being not as close as Ohio. Roy Cooper might be able to win that race by 2 or 3 points, and Husted or Brown might be within a point or two in Ohio. And so keep your eyes peeled on this race. I am so excited to cover this one because I didn't even expect it to be one that was within competitive range. Sherrod Brown had floated and more hinted that he wanted to run for Senate, but I still felt like there was something inching him towards the governorship out of the sake of electability and the sake of running for something that's more secure for him. But he wants to go either out with a bang or go for the gusto in this race. and it very much looks like he might, and it very much looks like he might go into this Senate race not as the favorite, but as the underdog who has a very real chance of winning in a Senate race that nobody on either side of the aisle thought that they would touch in the 2026 midterm elections. And yet, here we are, Sherrod Brown running for Senate, going to be a fascinating, fascinating race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.